Real-time sovereign is go.
Woo, the man of tomorrow, Sabzu, the rated R radio star, here with you for Real Time Sovryn, back in the studio. And, a couple things happened as late. And I'm going to be, to quote Agent Smith, you hear that, Mr. Anderson? I'm going to be honest with you. And I want to be honest with you right now. So, not that I'm ever not, but, I want to be forthright. How about that? Better word. Just doesn't look as good on a script, I guess, especially in 1998. I recently went to Michigan, and, here on Ice Planet Zero, or that's what I lovingly call New Hampshire, and I do mean that lovingly, um, I get to be very strange. And it's not just because it's New Hampshire or something like that. It's just because, Mrs. Sovryn and I were way out in the woods and no one really bothers us and, all of this and whatever. And even the people that we know, by and large, they know we're very strange. Most of them anyway, not all, but they know we're very strange. When I find myself having to go for, extended trips for whatever reason, to other places, not so bad in Europe. There, everybody's weird. No, I'm kidding. Not everybody's weird there. I find myself having to act normal. And on a long enough timeline, that gets to be very frustrating to me. It starts to grate at me. And that's Grate, by the way. So, that hit me. The other thing that hit me, or this is a two-part affair. So there's that. The other thing, I have been listening to quite a bit. Now, I've actually talked about this on Patreon content, on Q&As for Sovryn Tech, but I've been listening to quite a bit of a gentleman named Mark Gaffney. Someone who, in the conventional broader prospect, I'm sure is considered very weird, and some people may have some, potentially real concerns. I'm just going to leave that broad, okay? But he's somebody who I absolutely respect his intellect, and I think is a brilliant guy. And I've been listening to a lot of his work. I'm not going to get into a big history over what he does and the center that he quote unquote works for and whatever and all this, but he had a book come out, First Values, First Principles. I always get scared with that word first. It just reminds me of some other very interesting individuals. But anyway, he came out with this book, and he's also been on a ton of different podcasts. Someone who's very knowledgeable in Hebrew texts, Kabbalistic texts, like myself. And, I really appreciate a lot of what he has to say. And in fact, a lot of his interpretations of things, including within the Talmud and some other spaces, are pretty rare. And I say they're pretty rare. I say that very kindly, because I usually don't hear them outside of my own head many times, or, from other rare individuals that I've known in the past. So I respect that a lot. And his overall, his philosophy, and it's not just his, but, he's certainly a major proponent of it and one of the louder, if not the loudest voice on it, is Cosmo-Erotic Humanism. Okay. And, you listen to it and you listen to him, and they actually put out some great, now when you look up that book, it's going to say it's by David J. Temple. Okay. That's a pseudonym, for like all the voices that kind of come together in a symphony at at their little organization. Okay. And again, I'm not throwing any shade here at all. All right. Again, I have tremendous respect for these individuals, including Ken Wilber, Zach Stein, and but David J. Temple is a pseudonym for all of them. Now, they've also been putting out like this podcast that explores some of these ideas and really gives them some, like, they engage in some real-time thinking of these concepts that they lay out within, within what they consider to be, or what they call, cosmo-erotic humanism. And I have to admit, it's very attractive. Like, I mean, it's just a very, and they'd love that, right? It's a very alluring, lots of allurement. They'd love that too. It's a very alluring philosophy. And there's a lot of, when you hear them talk about it, like you can hear the logic, you can feel it actually, of what they're saying. Like, oh yeah, oh, that makes perfect. Oh yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. And, you keep going on with what they're talking about. And, I find myself listening to it. And this is the first time where, and you're going to ask me, what does this have to do with Michigan? Well, we'll get to it. But I find myself for the first time in, probably 15 years, where I am like actually reassessing, kind of my core beliefs. I don't like using that word, but my core ideology. I find myself reassessing my core. Let's just put it that way. Because again, it is such an attractive concept, and their arguments are really, I mean, it's just fascinating stuff to listen to, and they get so excited, and I love, they use very, to put it gently, they use very erotic language, which I do as well, and I appreciate that, and it just makes you, listen to it all the more. It's really powerful stuff that they're putting out there. I think there's also some truth that they're putting out there. Okay. Note I did say some. There's the chance, I'm just going to like leave this open here. There's a chance that in the future, because again, they are, kind of developing this in real time. These are kind of living conversations, living documents, if we want to use a controversial phrase like that. That in the future, they might figure out something where, boom, it just all clicks. And everything that they've been laying out for so long suddenly makes all the sense in the world and is axiomatic and self-evident and whatever, even though I think they already feel that way. But as much as it makes me question my core, like there are parts of the core of their arguments that I really feel like get taken as givens. Okay. So anyway, what is it affecting? What is there the chance that it's like, or that it's trying to rewrite within my core? Well, honestly, it's the, philosophy of Max Stirner. And, egoism for me is like the centerpiece, of everything. As Max Stirner, so eloquently said hundreds of years ago, the individual is the measure of all things. Now, I don't think that, Mark Gaffney and the boys would agree with that sentiment. I can't not agree with it. I mean, I feel so compelled by that. And even though what's interesting is, the guys into Cosmo-Erotic Humanism also bring up what I've brought up many times, that being the works of Archibald Wheeler and the concept of a participatory universe, as in reality is participatory between, the individual, in the universe existence. And I mean, that's a very simplified form of Wheeler's argument. Like the irony is, I feel like Wheeler's work absolutely points at that. Yes, the individual is the measure of all things. Why? Because you are a part of what creates reality itself, what creates perception, what creates, so much. Not that reality isn't real or that it's not objective. It most certainly is. But that you play a part in it. You are a co-creator, as I so regularly state. Now, I find myself, like I said, being very attracted to their ideas. But they stand in stark contrast, because they believe that there's a right and a wrong, there's a good and a bad, there's a morality, there's a value, right, which is the word they love. There's a value that comes out of just the very nature of existence. The literal chemistry of the universe has value, has a degree of consciousness. I might agree with that part, but the idea that it has a value, an inherent value, I mean, that does stand in contrast to the concepts of egoism of Max Stirner from his book, The Ego in Its Own, or The Unique in Its Property, depending upon which title you want to run with. Okay. But, Max Stirner's point is that basically everything is a spook. Everything's a fiction. It's all human generated fictions. Um, Morality and rights and all these other things, as to where, again, Cosmo-Erotic Humanism is saying, no, these aren't fictions. These aren't spooks. These aren't phantasms. These are inherent properties of existence and always have been. Now, again, they might make an argument in the future where I go, whoa, yep, you're right. I mean, maybe, because again, they're really good. I mean, they're really, really good. But in my understanding of reality, based upon research done by others like Wheeler, based upon the Zohar, based upon Kabbalistic texts, based upon texts that get at the very heart of reality, that discuss the very nature of reality and so on, that I accept and that I feel or that I experience as reflective of the reality that I experience. I can't agree. And I'm sure Mark Gaffney would probably try to lay out a lot of, different points within, say, perhaps Talmud or the Zohar or something, to disagree with me. But I would bat right back. But regardless, I'm sure that back and forth would happen, and it would be an absolutely fascinating one. And I'd love to have a conversation with the guy. Absolutely love to. You get rare minds like him. It's so precious. But as I experience reality, yes, like these stories, which is a core part of Cosmo-Erotic Humanism as well. These stories are just that. They are fictions. He keeps like ripping on Yuval Harari. Hey, I do too. Like Homo Deus, I mean, I ripped that book to shreds on Sovereign Tech years ago. Okay, I've got plenty of beef with Yuval Harari. But Yuval Harari's concept, that everything is a fiction, not that reality isn't real, but just that everything is a fiction. Like I am on board with that part. Okay, but I've got plenty of other things I could critique about Yuval Harari for sure. So trust me, there's a point to all of this. Okay, and it's not the ballpoint in my pen. This idea, that again, that there are somehow like inherent values in the universe. Again, I don't buy it. Okay. The individual is the measure of all things. That is a statement so radically axiomatic and dangerous, which is partly why, in fact, I was even messing around with Google Gemini earlier and trying to use its live feature where you can have a conversation with it, talk back and forth. It did not want to discuss Max Stirner. It basically ended off the conversation with, I could look up the script right now if I wanted to, but because it records it in text as well. But the conversation ended with Max Stirner's ideas lead to, dangerous outcomes and all. And it's like, well, yeah, I think that's the fucking point. But, but anyway, the idea that the individual is the measure of all things. Yes, in your life, and this gets into general semantics, another thing that I'm sure stands in contrast to Gaffney's ideas, but that I consider to be, ironically, absolutely true. Not just true. True and false are tough terms to deal with, but that is effectively axiomatic, meaning it's self-evident. And it's self-evident in that, again, as I always give the example, to me, a tank might not be so big. To a 6-year-old, it's huge. Okay, so there are parts of perception, which perceiving is part of that is measuring. Okay, there are parts of perception that are relative. It doesn't mean the tank doesn't objectively exist. It's just that there is a subjective relationship. There's a relativeness to it. Okay, that is different for every individual. So self-evidently, the individual is the measure of all things. Okay, the universe is not the measure of all things. The individual is. This gets into ultimately, part of thou art God. I'm reminded of Paul Atreides from Dune, saying he who controls the thing, or he who can destroy a thing controls the thing. And, the ability to create and destroy, that is an action of a God. And your ability to measure is effectively, the start of your ability to be able to destroy something. So that is in one sense, one of many, many senses, and it's one of the more, shall we say, malicious versions of it, but one of the, senses of thou art God, that you are a co-creator, you are God, and so is everyone else, right? In Max Stirner's work, everybody is equally the center of the universe. That's paradoxical, but again, and Gaffney would agree with this, when you find a paradox, that's when you start to find something closer to the truth. Okay, so the individual being the measure of all things is a totally self-evident statement. It's axiomatic. Now, I'm sure there would be some kind of disagreement with that, which I would absolutely love to have. Okay. So if the individual is the measure of all things, this leads us down another road, okay? Because Max Stirner isn't perfect either. Like, he's just not. I'm not coming on here as some kind of like blind apostle, okay? Max Stirner has his own issues, his own contradictions. Now, some want to write off those contradictions as him being coy or cute, or him, being joculant. I think there may be times where that is so, but then there are times where Max Stirner is being just frankly honest. Maybe he's feeling he's running into his own paradoxes, and maybe he just never had the chance to really dive deeper and explain more some of the contradictions. But maybe one of the biggest contradictions within the unique in its property is that you, the individual, right? You're the most important thing in the universe. And of course, every other individual is equally also the most important thing in the universe. Paradoxically, right? Concurrently. So you, however, are affected by externalities. Okay? As in your ownness, which is the term that Max Stirner would use, your Einzig, like your ownness, okay, you're unique, what you are, and achieving and understanding that ownness and living in a way that is confluent, is respectful and truly represents your ownness, your uniqueness, you're unique. Living in that way, and this may lead to the contradiction, is impossible. Like you can't if you are affected by externalities, by external forces, other people, animals, whatever. Okay, if you're affected by these things, how can you actually be, a self-radicalized individual, right? How can you be ownness when you can't just be yourself? So this is where, and really, like when you have philosophers, commentators, whoever, actually has honestly the sack to take on Max Stirner's work, this is one of the first things they like to go to say, no, Stirner's wrong, because you can't actually achieve the unique. It's not possible. Again, Stirner might have had a different answer than this, but this is something, I've contemplated for many years. And the answer really does come down to spirituality. Okay. Now, I'm not a big fan of that word, but what I'm getting at with that is the answer is that yes, you as a human being, as you understand, Homo sapiens sapiens, as you exist right now, you cannot supersede all of the externalities and stimuli that influence you as an individual. Okay, you can't. These things affect you. As good as you may get at acting and not reacting, and all of that jazz, okay, you're still going to be affected by these things. Unless you actually achieve, perhaps what the Kabbalist would say is the messianic consciousness, or you achieve, some kind of apotheosis, like you achieve a certain, like godlike being or something along those lines, which I'm not opposed to the human being being able to do that. Okay. Or you go the transhumanist route, which I am opposed to, even though, I'm not going to stop anybody. Like, your body's your body, go rock and roll. Okay. Those are the ways that you could potentially thwart the effects of externalities, and you could then really live in your ownness. Okay. But that's a route that would need to be taken, to be able to do that. So, again, the contradiction is, okay, you are to just, you are the individual, you're the measure of all things, you are the stuff, according to Max Stirner. You go out there and you do whatever makes you feel good. You go out there and you do your thing. But again, you are this self-radicalized, like radical idealized, self that knows exactly what you want and is not affected by anybody else's desires, and you're just going to go out there and take it. Again, that's not really possible, right? You're always affected by something. You could even be affected by a billboard, by advertising, and that is an externality. That is not something you desire to exist in the universe, right? That is something that is affecting you from the outside. So it's a contradiction, for sure. Now, in my efforts, to be that kind of individual, this gets back to the Michigan thing. Okay. Yeah, I'm weird. Okay. I don't play by the rules. I don't play by the normal rules. I don't play by morality. I don't play necessarily by ethics, right? Ethics is a longer conversation, but I don't play by these things. I do as best as I can. I do things my way. I don't always succeed. We do live in a civilization where certain things are needed, to exist in certain ways. Would I love to be able to eschew a lot of those external, domination structures and whatever else? Absolutely, I would. Sure. Okay. But I'm not at that point yet. It's a bit of a journey. Okay. But, Stirner would say there's a destination. It's not just the journey, as to where, a lot of people are always like, oh yeah, it's not about the destination. It's about the journey, blah, blah, blah. No. For Stirner, it's the destination. So so one would argue I am living in some degree of contradiction, in all of that, much like Stirner would be, or that his ideology or his anti-ideology would effectively be espousing, or not resolving anyway. So I bring this up to, get at, we have a problem, okay, because we recognize that there are external forces that, feel beyond our control in our present state of existence and evolution, okay. I think we find ideas like Cosmo-Erotic Humanism and really other philosophies, whatever those happen to be, anarcho-capitalism, some form of libertarianism, or hell, if you're on the other side of the spectrum, communism, socialism, all these things that seem to address and bring order to that which you do not have control over, or that you don't feel you have control over outside of you at this present time. Okay. And I get that. All right. I really get that. And I think part of the reason that egoism didn't just land into people's laps and go, well, here it is. Max Stirner figured it all out, even though some people see it that way. I think a big part of that comes down to that he doesn't address how does the individual supersede these externalities. Okay, now I gave you some examples of how one could do that. Could you go on some kind of spiritual path that makes you, some kind of a god, it takes you to another stage of evolution. Let's put it in that perhaps more comfortable terms for some. Sure. Okay. That's an option. Transhumanism, whatever. I mean, that's kind of the same thing, just a mechanical process instead of a biological one. Again, I'm not a fan of the mechanical process, but regardless, it's there. But I think that there's another direction that you can actually go. And it's kind of, it's very coincidental, almost ironic, because the idea of that basically what we're talking about with, apotheosis, or with becoming God or joining with God or something, or, transhumanism or whatever, that it's really a form of ascension, right? That's really what we're getting at. If we were to use, say, Stargate terms, it'd be ascension technology, right? That the ancients had, something along those lines. Okay. Becoming a being of pure energy, something like that, right? Not that transhumanism is going to get you there, but anyway, get my point. Don't want to get lost on that. So that's ascension. But I think there's actually another direction to go. Now, the irony is, and a lot of people don't really, a lot of people don't grok this. When Kabbalah talks about, going to these other states of existence, going to the palaces and things like this, it's actually a path. You don't go up, you go down. It's not ascension, it's actually descension. And I find that ironic because my own spirituality, which is a connection with the spiritual aspects of existence, okay, and that's all I really mean by spirituality. I don't necessarily mean any kind of dogma or, anything like that. Certainly there are texts that I look to that help me focus, but that's what they're about. Leads me to the thought of dissension, not necessarily ascension, even though I've certainly used that term in the past, ascension. And what I think you can actually get at, okay, and this is what egoism doesn't address, what you can actually do instead of like trying to overcome your biology, okay, instead you embrace it in the deepest possible way, okay, you discover, you take the time to, instead of looking outward, how do I combat all of these externalities that are trying to control me? You look inward and find what is your essential self? What is your essence? What is you could even use the term quintessence, right? What is your quintessence? What is your essence? What is your essential self? What is your core nature? Because you do have one that is unique to you, because you are, as Gaffney would say, you, and I agree with him on this, you are a unique self-symphony, right? You have taken a form through the genetic lottery and whatever else. You have taken a form that is uniquely yours and that no one else shares. Not even identical twins, share the same 100%, genetic makeup. It might be close, but it ain't 100%. So you have a unique essential self, a core nature that you can explore. And within that, when you realize what that core nature is, I've always told you that the most important question that you can answer, that any individual can answer, is, what do I want? And that is the question that actually leads to you exploring and delving into, down to, inward, your core nature, and finding out what that is, trying to find out what are your actual intrinsic desires, right? What do you intrinsically want? What do you want? And the concept of wanting is itself a pursuit of pleasure. Okay, so you are looking for a pleasure. Now, pleasure is a very funny word, right? Because honestly, you could find pleasure in pain. I find pleasure in pain every day. Every time I work out, I am hurting. I love it, right? So pleasure can take any form is the point that I want to bring up. It's not that we're not talking about pleasure in a dichotomy of pleasure versus pain. This isn't exactly an Epicurean concept of pleasure, but it is pleasure all the same. And if you wanted to put terms on it, you could call it, say, the pleasure, perhaps a simple, like a simplistic pleasure, as to where, and that is part of that dissension. Again, going inward, finding the core self, as to where ascension is getting above all of this. And you could call it perhaps a complex pleasure, or pleasure of complexity. Okay, so that's your actual dichotomy, is perhaps simple versus complex. And I think when you do that work, what some people would call, like, say, self-archaeology, things like this, when you do that work and you actually get to the intrinsic wants that you have, that really don't have anything to do with what's outside of you. This is where meditation is a great and wonderful thing. This is where getting past language, after having a great orgasm and things like this, is a great and wonderful thing, right? This is the beauty, perhaps, of what in Kabbalah they would call Hokmah consciousness, when you get beyond words, okay, because you're actually feeling what you're just all feeling, you're all sensation, it's anoesis, right? And you're getting at the core. That is a moment where you are getting at the core. You think it's where it's getting outside of you, but perhaps it goes both ways. Perhaps though it's getting in, it's going down instead of up. It's going down into you, and you're able for a moment to explore what you really want. What is the pleasure that you are seeking? And it can be, honestly, it can be different for everybody. But we do have biological similarities for sure. Similarities, keyword, okay. And, part of that is the expression through what we are, through our consciousness and its relationship with our biology. Now, they're intertwined. They're not really two different things. They're part and parcel, but that's the point, the mind, spirit, body, right? Like with dashes in between it all. And so when you get at the core of your mind, spirit, body, you don't ignore your body. You don't ignore what your body can do. You don't ignore what your body wants, okay? But you meld it with what you're feeling spiritually, mentally, right? Because they're all one, and you let them all kind of come together, okay? In finding this, this essential self. I think you find what that pleasure is, and then once you know what the pleasure is, you should have an idea of how to seek it, or how to fulfill it. And once you get fulfillment, that's really what Max Stirner was talking about the whole time, was the fulfillment of these things. And so all of this is getting at the idea that discovering what your intrinsic pleasures are, not seeking necessarily some external ascension away from everything per se, but going deeper, going inside, finding your most base, perhaps even based self, perhaps even debased self. I don't know, if you want to consider it in relationship to, common senses and morality. Basically, find those wants and desires that have nothing to do with societal expectation, morality, ethics, any of that. Nothing to do with value, just with what's within you, okay? And what that pleasure is. And this is scary, right? Because you're going to be seeing the human animal, but you're also going to be seeing the spiritual, okay? So you're going to be seeing desire, power, so many different aspects of what actually makes up the human being and what makes the human being such a formidable creature. And I imagine it's a scary journey for anyone, myself included. Okay. And believe me, I've been on that journey. I know. But then what you don't have to deny. Then what you actually want. And once you do that, once you really dig in there and find out what you actually want, again, instead of like trying to ascend above it all, but descend into the most basic, primitive, primal aspects of who you are, then you can actually engage these externalities, recognize them more for what they are, and then you are this individual that can measure all things, because beyond a shadow of a doubt within yourself what your actual pleasures are. Okay. And the thing is, again, this is different for everyone. There is no grand system of how things, work within this. So Cosmo-Erotic Humanism, has this idea that there are like our values based into the universe, or baked into the universe. That you might find that what you discover inside of you does not play well with these supposed values. In fact, I'd say it's a very good chance that they won't. So that's a major reason, why I can't like really accept this idea that there is this, basically the idea is there is this universal essentialism, right? That there are these, and when I say universal, I mean as in the universe. There is this essentialism of the universe, okay? That there are set properties of the universe that basically tell you what's right and wrong. Now, again, the universe I live within does not operate that way, and you can see it, okay? For so many reasons, Because what does the universe seem to operate on? You could say at the quantum level that it operates on allurement, but in the classical level, it operates on rampant destruction. As I always say, the universe is a meat grinder. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a malevolent creature, because I do agree it's a superorganism. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a malevolent creature, but it also doesn't mean that it's benevolent. It just is. And I know my general semantics friends would have a problem with me saying is, but I did it anyway. So, I would argue that if there is an essentialism, and I know some people bristle at that word, if there is an essentialism, the only essentialism is literally pleasure. Okay? I'm kind of reminded of, Aleister Crowley saying love is the only law. I get it. That's nice. And I'm open to the idea that, very open to the idea and actually believe, much like Buckminster Fuller, that love is actually like a property of the universe. Okay. But it's a property of the universe. What the universe actually, and this, it's so funny because this is where I actually kind of agree, and probably why it's so attractive to me. This is where I somewhat agree with Cosmo-Erotic Humanism, in that I am arguing for that the universe literally runs on pleasure. Okay, not love, but on pleasure. But then there's the idea, but Cosmo-Erotic Humanism takes it to the point that, okay, well, in pleasure there's value, and within value there's rights, and so there's a right and wrong. And it's like, no. Pleasure is just pleasure. And again, pleasure is different for everyone, and there's not necessarily a right and wrong within pleasure. Okay. So what I would actually argue for, to get to the point, is not so much even egoism, because I don't think egoism addresses this well. All right. And I've said this for years, that Max Stirner, there still needs to be an evolution of Max Stirner's thought. He got the ball rolling, but there's more work to do. And so what I actually argue for is a hedonistic essentialism, and hedonism in the sense of pleasure. Okay. And I don't mean, hedonism in the modern context of, drinking and all that other jazz. Though, again, your body, go ahead. Okay. Rock and roll might not end up with the best outcomes for yourself, but okay. Depending upon what you consider health. So, but I argue for a hedonistic essentialism, and that's at the very core of existence. Certainly for the co-creator, for the thou art God, that is the unique one, that is the human being, and not just human, but also, again, I always argue for other species that I think have achieved our level of sapience. But yes, hedonistic essentialism. I think that's really what we're looking at here. That there is an essentialism within pleasure, and that the fulfillment of that pleasure, that is what motivates the conscious being. Okay. Not the instinctual, even though it's about paying attention to your instincts and getting to that, but you are still more than your instincts. But that the conscious individual operates on that. Now you could say that that's just, well, we're just talking about enlightened self-interest. Okay, sure. But somehow saying that doesn't sink into anybody's heads. So I think perhaps a new term, and I haven't heard anybody use this term before, and it clicked for me, actually while I was on that trip to Michigan, hedonistic, the pursuit of essential pleasure, hedonistic essentialism. That's the next step. That's not about ascension. It's actually the opposite. It's about descension. It's about getting at the essential self, your core nature. All right. Not superseding that nature, but getting at that core nature, going deep down, going primal. All right. Now, this is going to require a lot of conversations. We might do them sometimes in real-time Sovryn, but it's an important thing to get out there to explain this. And really, I think that, maybe there's some way that Cosmo-Erotic Humanism and hedonistic essentialism, or egoism can actually harmonize, but I don't imagine so. I don't necessarily see that happening as much as I would love, regardless. I think conversations between, people who are, who espouse, say, general semantics, right? The work of Alfred Korzybski, and people who espouse Cosmo-Erotic Humanism, or those espousing, egoism / hedonistic essentialism and so on. Those conversations need to happen, because that's where we're actually going to, get at what I would argue would be a map. Okay, now, of course, Korzybski would say the map is not the territory, but will actually allow us, would give individuals the map to find the territory itself. Okay, and the territory being that essential self, your core nature. I think those conversations would go a long way. It'd be a crucible for truth. It'd be powerful stuff. I'd love to see it. And I'd love to see it done respectfully. I'm not arguing for some kind of, WWE style SmackDown, even though that could be kind of interesting too. but we don't need to do that. Actually, I know there's some big boys who push for Cosmo-Erotic Humanism, maybe even bigger than me, and right on. So regardless, this is, it would be a friendly competition, in my opinion. But I think it's one that, again, I'd love to see like some kind of, syncretizing, harmonizing, of these ideas. I don't know that it's going to happen though. And if not, then I'd love to see the genuine engagement, between these concepts, because I think they're, in a very real sense, like these are the two, that are showing a healthier path for the individual than just about any other. Even though I don't necessarily see, and look, I'm not like, tooting my own horn here, being like, yeah, I'm championing, hedonistic essentialism and listen to me and blah, blah. No. I never pretend to have everything figured out, by no means. Other than, I do have the understanding that through many different traditions and many different schools of thought, and through much research, that yes, pleasure is at the very heart of existence. And I've been espousing that forever, and certainly as long as I've been doing a show. So hedonistic essentialism is just the term that I am using. You don't have to use it. I'm not saying it's some kind of necessarily new school of thought. I really just think that it's an evolution and perhaps an answer to some of the contradictions within egoism itself. But I want to get it out there, and I want to get the conversation started. And if you want to keep the conversation going, put that action in the comments, whether you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to it on Spotify, which also has a comments feature, or wherever you're listening to it. And if there's comments available, put it on. You can also email me. There is an email address if you want to get questions in. It's fu@nwo.red. What does the FU stand for? You guessed. No, I'm kidding. It just stands for follow-up. That's all. So letter FU at nwo.red. And I'm excited to have these kinds of conversations. They need to be had. And yeah, just kind of getting that started here on a real-time sovereign. And so with that, I will see all of you, on the other side.